And first, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Heather Richie. She is a lecturer in spatial planning and energy policy in the Belfer School of Architecture and the Built Environment in Ulster University. Heather's research interests have developed around maritime spatial planning and land-sea interactions, regulations at coasts and beyond. Heather is a community member of the Irish Sea Maritime Forum, the MSP Research Network, and was co-opted as a member of the Marine and Coastal Working Group for the Council for Nature Conservation and Countryside in 2016. And Heather recently has also contributed to ESPON topic paper on MSP LSI. So she is perfectly fitted to open up this roundtable. Okay, Heather, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the kind introduction, Luke, and for the kind invitation to speak this afternoon. Yes, I was on the writing team for the topic paper informing this roundtable, and I've actually just come back from my year-long maternity leave with my third baby. So to help inform today's presentation, I thought I might use some of my holiday photographs from the summer to highlight some of the issues with coastal governance. So there's a bit of a UK feel here, but with the Northern Irish focus. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to cover today, hopefully in the time, is the governance context, the administrative context and issues arising from that, land use planning tools that have been used to inform coastal policy, a little bit on the emerging marine planning system, a little bit on climate change awareness, coastal public participation in environmental decision. So next slide. In terms of the coastal and marine governance arrangements, I'm guessing that probably a lot of you have seen this visual before. So this is 200 plus layers of GIS data, and it's really showing the marine and coastal activities around the Irish Sea. So hopefully you might be able to make out just the outline of Northern Ireland in the top left, moving down to the Republic of Ireland, then Scotland, the northwest of England, and down into Wales, and then the Isle of Man in the middle. So it's just to really show you that we have a really complex system of rights and responsibilities. In terms of the governance, then, it's very much been a period of flux, and that's both for terrestrial and marine environments. We have lots of legislative changes, a massive amount of planning reform, and especially so in Northern Ireland because we had a very centralised system that has now moved to a decentralised system. So the local authorities now have planning powers. We've also decreased our amount of authorities. We used to have 26 and now we've got 11. So there's been a lot of movement in terms of that. A lot of policy consolidation and decentralisation. We've also got the emergence of the marine planning agenda and also integrated coastal zone management and where all of that fits into it. Notwithstanding Brexit, the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change, and giving a nod to the recent IPCC report. All of this taken together really affects our capacity to sustainably manage our coastal and marine environments. And what we need, and I think this is probably the bottom line of my presentation, is we need a lot more collaboration, cooperation and coherence across all the different spatial scales, and hopefully this will lead to a lot better sort of sustainable and integrated development. Next slide, please. In terms of looking at the coast then, this picture is a picture of our holiday destination. So this is Portrush, which is on the very top of the Northern Irish coast. It runs along the North Antrim coast. It's roughly about 45 minutes drive from where I'm based at the minute. So I live near Londonderry up in the northwest. And it's very much a typical traditional bucket and spade destination. You know, there's plenty of fish and chip shops. We have the most beautiful sandy beaches and of course very cold and clear Atlantic waters, of which I was in swimming every day with my sister in my swimsuit, and it was beautiful. So in the summer there are lots of tourists and all summer long it's a very prosperous town in terms of second home ownership. We actually hosted the Open Golf Championships a few years ago, and that's coming again back in a few years' time. But off season, there are high levels of deprivation, seasonal unemployment, and it's really like a ghost town in the winter. Next slide, please. So Portrush has experienced many growth and decline cycles. There are lots of new homes and holiday apartments that have been recently completed. So a lot of these might have started back in the recession, but have only recently been completed within the last year. And of course, an unprecedented demand for rental accommodation, hotel beds and B&Bs this year and last year because everybody is at home holidaying. Now, due to the pandemic, the photo that you see here is a picture of Barry's amusement arcade. And this has got, dodgem cars, roller coasters and slot machines. And this actually closed down with the pandemic last year. Now, this is a famous Northern Ireland institution. If you ask anybody, they will say that they've been here on their holidays. It's now closed and is likely to be sold to a developer, probably as a hotel. And it just is to show you the growth and decline cycles that do happen in these seaside areas. So next slide, please. This photo was taken a little bit further along the coast at McGilligan Point. So this is actually looking over to Donegal. We're very close to Donegal where we're based, and this is on the banks of the River Foyle. So this area is at high risk of coastal erosion, and there's agricultural land just sitting behind in this photo, which I'll show in a second. And meters of it have been lost over the past couple of decades. So what we tend to see is a lot of makeshift sea defences, and this is an environmental challenge, notwithstanding that there could be potential planning enforcement issues here, but that is for another day. But it's just to show that this is not a long-term solution and it's definitely not sustainable. Next slide, please. So this is actually the other view just behind of that picture. So you can see a lot of actual building materials have just been dumped here. You can see the boundary fence in the background, and it's very sandy bedrock material. This is an example of the traditional hold the line and build our way out of trouble response that we seem to have to coastal erosion. But this is no longer sustainable. Next slide, please. This is not a long-time solution at all. So we need to have alternative ways of thinking. So in terms of the administrative context then, the UK is known for its terrestrial planning system, which is a very discretionary system. Land use planning tends to operate through various mechanisms and tools and different hierarchies of plans. So we have structural plans and local development plans, all operating through our local planning authorities. But in terms of the management of coastal zones, these do not seem to fit within any one single authority. There's lots of different sort of geographies and different spatial scales to take into consideration. So I think there's a bit of a patchwork framework here where no one is really sure who's in charge of what and where. Okay, next slide, please. So this photo is actually looking out of the view of the place that my sister actually rented for her holidays this year in the same town. So we were just down the road from each other. And as you can see, it is a pretty spectacular view. And just to explain, looking at land use planning tools, there seems to be 4 different approaches for coastal planning that's emerging across the UK in each of the devolved administrations. So some of them are using land use planning tools to facilitate coastal planning. So if I just take the example of Northern Ireland, hold on, my cat has just jumped onto my knee, hold on. In Northern Ireland, we have the regional development strategy, and it's really the long-term plan which is delivering spatial aspects of the programme for government. So it's very much based on regional prosperity. And what that has really done is said that coastal issues should be the responsibility of the UK Marine Policy Statement, and any subsequent marine plans that come out will provide the spatial guidance for the land-sea interface. So it's quite clear that there's no specific place for coastal policy in Northern Ireland. It seems to be scattered around in different policies. So another example is the strategic planning policy statement. And it sets out regional planning policies for the development of land, but it has a small section on coastal development. And what it really says is that it's trying to protect undeveloped coast from inappropriate, unsustainable development and supporting sensitive regeneration of developed coast. So this photo is just to show a little aspect of that regeneration. You can just see along the front there, the balustrade and the pavement is all regenerated, and nice lighting and bins and benches and things like that. So that's just that photo. So next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but it's really just to show you how disparate the policy response is across the UK, and it uses lots of different policy tools. But I'll move on to the next slide, please. So this visual is useful to show the geographical overlap between terrestrial and marine environments, and also between legislation and policy. And it seemed initially that marine spatial planning might have acted as a bit of a panacea for coastal management, but at times it seems a little bit hard in practice to see where land use planning stops and marine planning starts, and which system or plan takes precedence, and how complementary are those plans of each other, and also in the mix, where does integrated coastal zone management fit into all of that. So marine plans are being developed across the UK now and are being implemented. Northern Ireland, we have got our draft marine plan. We've actually had it for 2 years, so it should be implemented this autumn. But it's just a question of how complementary are these plans going to be with land use planning. It's quite unclear as yet. And again, that's where we need much more coherence. Okay, next slide, please. In terms of this slide, I just want to give you, it's just to show a brief overview to show all the different marine planning regions in the Irish Sea. So all of these institutions are doing their own plans, all actually except for the Isle of Man, which is a little bit different, but they are not going to have a plan. They're going to just have like a policy approach. Then if you look on the right-hand side, we've got all the different marine plan areas in England, and there are 11 plans to take account of both offshore and onshore. So it's just to show you the mix of plans that's emerging across the UK and Ireland. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So a little bit on climate change awareness. So this visual is of hard sea defences, which are quite common views across Northern Ireland. So the top is actually in Portrush, and it's just on the other side of the harbour. We've got that photograph from, and then the bottom one is very visual hard sea defences at Bangor, which is in County Down, just on the northeast coast. So coastal erosion is a massive issue, and there doesn't seem to be a real joined up approach to dealing with it. The situation may improve when we get our own climate change legislation. And at the minute, there appears to be 2 opposing climate change bills moving through Stormont. So in Northern Ireland, we always do things a little bit differently. So in March, we had a private members bill from the Green Party, which wants net zero carbon emissions by 2045. So that's a very ambitious target. And then later in July, then we got our second bill from our Minister for the Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Edwin Poots, who has set out a less ambitious target. So once we get the legislation on the go, there might be a little bit more clarity in terms of how we can deal with this, because at the minute coastal erosion seems to fall between several different government departments, and it's not the local planning authority. So if we had a climate change commissioner, that might help with some of these issues. So next slide, please. In terms of coastal defence, then, it seems to be done very much on an ad hoc basis around Northern Ireland, without much thought for the wider consequences and also the maintenance of these sea defences as well. And my colleague, Professor Andrew Cooper, once said that Northern Ireland will be rimmed in concrete. And I think this photo just is a perfect example of that, again in Portrush. So to have any meaningful approach to planning our coast, I think maybe the introduction of shoreline management plans like the rest of UK might be quite useful. And in that sense, then local planning authorities could take these into account when making decisions on the coast. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so coastal partnerships. There are many coastal partnerships across the UK. And like this picture of my 3 kids and their little friend, they are all doing roughly the same thing. They are all doing an important job in bringing together coastal stakeholders to deliver sustainable management. So they're all roughly going in the same direction. They're just not aligned up as such, and they're so very unevenly spread as well. And they face very many challenges in terms of their resourcing and their staffing as well, which is a real shame because they do such an important role in coastal planning. And 2 in particular, just to draw your attention to, is the Scottish Coastal Forum, which was instrumental in advising Marine Scotland. And then the Northern Ireland Coastal and Marine Forum, set up in 2006, which was in charge of implementing Northern Ireland's ICZM strategy. But it was done on a non-statutory voluntary basis, so it's been in a bit of a state of flux and the forum is no longer going. So I think it would be amazing if we could get that re-established for Northern Ireland. So next slide, please. Okay, finally on to public participation. So public participation is very well established and lots of people are aware of the land use planning tools around sustainability appraisals and environmental impact assessments, which are used regularly. And local planning authorities produce now statements of community involvement for land use plans and for marine plans as well. But again, there's no such provisions for participation at the coastal zone. So we need many more opportunities to effectively engage with local coastal communities. NGOs really, especially in those places that might not have a local coastal forum existing. So we found that NGOs actually have a really seminal role in playing, and they do seem to give a voice to challenging decision makers. So final slide, please. Okay, so overall, I think it's a really complex patchwork that we've got. It's a bit of a disparate approach across the UK. There are some policy vacuums, and there's just this idea of no real sense of an integrated approach just yet. But I think with the land use planning reforms and new legislation being introduced, we are getting somewhere. I think there is a bit of a new era for coastal management, and I think there are a lot of positive change, and there is a role for ICZM, and marine planning is really helping to do that, but we still have quite a long way to go. And again, that's notwithstanding the issues that I haven't really touched on today, Brexit and COVID and climate change and things like that. But I think if we do have collaboration, cooperation and coherence, we will get there. So thank you very much for listening.